all, I think that every year should be the International Year of the Woman Farmer. Calories are cheap. Nutrition is expensive. This is not charity. You are missing half of your population if you don't think about women. There's no way. Every 1 degree Celsius increase in long-term average temperature, women farmers lose 24% more than men.
Ana Maria, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Very happy and excited to be joining you in this show.
Absolutely. Well, let's start. You've had an amazing career. I was just reading about some of the amazing work that you've done. Can you tell us a little bit, for people that don't know you, about how you got to where you are today?
That's an interesting question. So the topics that I work on and the ones that I feel very passionate about, they are very, very much a result of my childhood. I was born in Colombia, in Bogotá, and I grew up surrounded by these very strong women from both sides. So from my mother's side, my aunt, the sister of my mother, La Tía Clarita, she was the first woman in Colombia to graduate as a mathematician. And then the second woman was my mother. Yeah, the second was my mother. And nowadays, this sounds like nothing, but you need to understand that at that time, Colombia was a very patriarchal society, and women were not supposed to even go to university. And the fact that they were able to go to university and to study mathematics was a real new thing, and it was not doing what people were expecting them to do. And so my aunt graduated in 1966, and to put this in context, it was not until 1954, I think, that women in Colombia gained the right to vote. So 10 years later, 11 years later, then this woman becomes a mathematician. So I was very much surrounded by these women that were walking the talk in terms of saying, if you have dreams, regardless of, how odd they seem and how difficult to achieve, there's always a way to do them. And then from the side of my father, my aunt Camila, La Tía Camila, she was the first woman in Colombia to venture into cinema by becoming a director of a feature film. So again, this was at a time that women were not supposed to go into these type of activities. I remember Camila talking to me and saying, just like carrying the camera, because they were so heavy and people were looking at her and what is she doing in here? So women that were really pioneers in what they were doing. My mother became a professor of mathematics in the university. And so I grew up very much, I love math, I love science, but also the other side, the social aspect and, getting connected to people. And actually that was part of the decision to, go into something that had the rigorosity and that I could work and apply math, but at the same time that could help me to understand social issues, and through that to be able to create a better world where people, regardless of if they were men, women, if they were born in one country or the other, they could be able to achieve their dreams, even though they were apparently very hard to achieve.
It's so important to have those role models to open up what future is possible, but also such strong leaders moving forward ahead of you. You're now the director of adaptive and equitable food systems. Why are these systems so important?
One reason is because of climate change. And what we are experiencing is that climate change is becoming a real challenge, especially for small-scale farmers. And these are the farmers that, one, they produce in many countries. They are the ones that produce most of the food. But two, they're the ones that are really suffering all the impacts when the droughts or the floods come. So the adapted piece of the adapted and equitable food systems addresses how do we make sure that these small scale farmers that are being really impacted climate change, that they have the tools, they have the knowledge, they have the capacity to implement innovations that can help them to reduce these impacts. And especially for small scale farmers, that for them, having rainfall or not makes a huge difference in terms of bringing food to the family or not, or losing everything that they have. So these food systems, they really need to be able to address the issue of producing food when climate is changing. And then why equitable food systems? Because these food systems need to work for everybody, for both men and women. And what we have seen is that the same way that I was saying that small scale farmers are the ones that are hit hardest because of climate change, among these small scale farmers, what we have seen is that women are especially impacted more than men. And it's not because they cannot react to climate change, it's because if you go into the causes of these differences, is because many times they don't have access to the finance, they don't have access to the information, many times they don't have lands. So all these compounds into women being the ones that are suffering the most, but at the same time, the ones that have the opportunity to really thrive and to implement innovations that can be beneficial for everybody in terms of these food systems. So this is at the end. The third piece that is really important is that these food systems also need to provide healthy food. So it's not only the quantity of the food that these farmers are producing, but it's also what are the crops that are being grown and are they benefiting or not everybody in the society. So adapted and equitable food systems really speak about the importance of thinking about these three dimensions, having a holistic approach: the climate dimension, the gender dimension, and the nutrition dimension.
It's really helpful to understand the different dimensions. You mentioned gender equality is one of those dimensions. There's a recent report from FAO that estimates that 1/3 of working women are employed across food systems. What do we know about women's livelihoods in food systems across the world?
We know a lot. A lot, and it is very important to keep in mind this information. So especially in sub-Saharan Africa, which is where most of my work is, we know that around 3/4 of all working women work in agri-food systems. So activities related to agri-food systems. So that's a very important proportion. But also, if you think about which kind of activities these women are involved, off-farm activities, so going beyond production. So all those activities in the food systems that are outside from the farm. If we think about women, they dominate these off-farm activities in sub-Saharan Africa, and these are activities especially in relation to processing, to trading. Almost 2/3 of workers in these areas are women. So these are important numbers that we are seeing because they give us ideas on where do we need to work mostly. But it's not only the participation of women in these activities, agri-food activities, it's also the type of work that they are engaged with. And what we have seen as well is that women are very much concentrated in informal, low-paid, and vulnerable roles. And you'd be surprised to know that nearly 90% of employed women in the agri-food sector work in the informal economy. And obviously, this has huge consequences in terms of formal contracts, in terms of social protection. So yeah, they play a very important role. They are very vulnerable because of the type of activities that they engage with, and they face many barriers in order to be successful in these activities. And again, just to give you a little bit in terms of the numbers, what we are seeing, and we see a lot of opportunities in using digital tools, for instance, to give information, advisories in relation to when to farm, when to apply the water, which varieties of the seeds to plant. If you think about, for instance, access to internet, because a lot of this, it's done through accessing internet, there's a huge digital gender divide. If you think about 2024, only 30% of women in Africa use internet compared to 43% of men. So, there's a difference that are happening, and these are part of the root causes of why women are being impacted in a different way when you think about agri-food systems. And I don't want to be so pessimistic about this. There's also really interesting things that are happening around. And some of my own experience, for instance, one of the first trips that I did when I joined Gates Foundation was to India. And I went there to visit one of our partners, PANI, which is the People's Action for National Integration. And they are working in eastern Uttar Pradesh in India. And they're putting together one program that is called the Community Resilience or the Community Resource Person. Community Resource Person. And what this program is doing is engaging women in the rural sector. And just by doing little things, training them in terms of different activities. So, for instance, how to better use the water, or how to make sure that you know the status of the health of your soil. And then based on that, how to apply the fertilizers, what's the quantity. Just by doing this really changed this woman, because since they are part of this community, they are being trusted. Once that they had this training, they started interacting with the rest of the community and giving advices to them. And I had the opportunity to have long conversations with them, with this woman. And they came from like just starting giving these advisories to saving some money to put up shops where they could also sell the fertilizers based on the advisories that they were given, based on the measurement of and the testing of the health of the soil. So really how they changed their lives and how they were telling me, now I have a clear idea of what I want to do, where I want to go, and the entire community, and the entire community was benefiting from that work, and they feel very comfortable saying that they were resource persons. So some people don't like being a resource. They felt that the value that they were adding to the community was being a resource person. And something that was very interesting for me was that, and I asked them, so you don't have a husband, you don't have kids, how do you do to manage this shop and to go to the farms and give advisories? And what most of them told me was that, well, yes, I do have a family. Yes, it is hard. I wake up very early in the morning and go to bed very, very late. But once that my husband started seeing everything that was happening in terms of how people wanted to have a conversation with me, they were listening to my advices, they were going to my shops, they're starting to see the value that I was bringing into home, and they started helping with the kids and with other things that traditionally I was the only one in charge of that. So this is just to say that there are and this is just one of many experiences out there where, and the main message for me is that when you give these women the resources that they need to be successful, they do amazing things. And that's when the magic happens, and you see how they become entrepreneurs, and they don't only start feeding their family, they feed the entire community.
If you had to summarize what are the most persistent challenges that women, both as producers and consumers, face in the food system, what would it be?
So I believe, and I'm going back to my root causes of the problem. And the reason, Paul, that I go back to this is because many times in this work, we just act upon the symptoms of a problem and we don't really go into the root causes. And if we don't go into those root causes, it's hard to be successful. So I think that thinking about why do we see these differences in food systems if you compare men to women, why? What is behind there? And a lot of that is because many times they don't have access to land. So they don't have titles for their lands. They do not have collateral, for instance, for us, for a credit. And many of these innovations, thinking about climate change, for instance, they have really, so the benefits of investing in these innovations is really high. But you need to have money to invest in those. And many times women do not have, because of for instance, the lack of collateral for asking for a credit, they don't have that. They don't have access to information. Many times they do not have access to know, what is the appropriate intervention for my specific land or for the specific problem that I'm dealing with my crop. They don't have access to extension systems. If you are thinking about using AI, that it's one innovation that we see with a lot of opportunity. But again, there's a divide in terms of that. They many times don't have access to that. And then, Paul, very important, the luxury of having time. So most of the times they are the ones that need to stay at home. They need to take care of the kids, which obviously it is very important. But then how do you manage then to go into other activities and to be successful going into these other activities? So I think that these underlying factors are the ones that our projects need to keep in mind and need to understand how to work through them to make sure that women have the same opportunity to implement these activities and to be able to be successful when working in agri-food systems. So yeah, I think that and climate change is also a challenge that is impacting women more than men. And there's a lot of documentation in relation to that, Paul. What we have seen in terms of the modeling that we have done is that for every 1 degree Celsius increase in long-term average temperature, women farmers lose 24% more than men. So you see real differences in relation to that. We have also documenting differences in terms of implementation of climate adaptation practices in the rural sector, and women are way behind in terms of implementing this, again, for the reasons that I just stated. But the other thing that we have seen, which is really interesting, is that when women have this knowledge, when they have the ability to, for instance, get a credit, they're the ones that pay faster. They're the ones that do not default on their credits. And they're the ones that are implementing more adaptation practices, even if you compare to men. So this is to say, just give them, and I go back to, the woman that I have been surrounded, give them the opportunities, they will just make the magic.
At the moment, there's this real push to continue to make women's roles more visible, and these sorts of examples and stories are critical. 2026 has been named the International Year of the Women Farmer as just one example. From your perspective, why is that important? And in addition to that, what else is needed to achieve more equitable food systems for women?
Well, first of all, I think that every year should be the International Year of the Woman Farmer. No, but it's true. It's because of the importance. And I want to give you another number, Paul. And FAO has been great in terms of producing this information to somehow changing the narrative. So one of the key numbers that I use usually, it's the $1 trillion. So what FAO, in terms of their analysis, was that supporting women farmers, what they need to succeed, would add $1 trillion to the global economy while reducing food insecurity. I mean, if you are an investor, Paul, this is a really high return on your investment. So why don't put money into this woman? And I think that the International Year of the Woman Farmer is a good excuse to put the narrative in the center of the table and to get people around that. And to, again, ask us these hard questions in relation to the root causes, why we are seeing these gaps when you compare men and women working in agri-food systems. What is happening there? What can we do? And the fact is that there's really a really small portion of development funding for food that goes into really understanding these gender-related barriers, understanding the prominent role that women play in agri-food systems and what to do about these differences. And we have been using that, and in different occasions that I have participated, it's a little bit in terms of making the case that on why it is so relevant, one, to understand what are those barriers, and two, based on those understanding, give women the tools, the information that they need to really being able to be successful. And a lot of the things that we have been doing also in the foundation is a little bit changing the narrative in terms of the way that we support these kind of activities. And many times the women are victims. So poor women, they have been so impacted because of climate change. So somehow once that you start this narrative in terms of victims, then what you do is charity so that women can, deal with these issues in relation to climate change and their crops. And we are changing the narrative in terms of saying, no, this is not charity. One, you are missing half of your population if you don't think about women. There's no way to be successful without thinking about this. And two, it's a very strong investment. And we have a lot of examples where when women have the capacity, the information, the tools, they are doing wonderful things. And the returns on these investments are very interesting. So it's also trying to use this International Year of the Woman Farmer to change narratives in the way that we see the problem and in the types of solutions that we are proposing in relation to this problem. And a lot of the things that I also have said around conversations in relation to this is that we need to, give women the opportunity to get involved into activities that have high value. How do we think about working on processing and packaging fruits and vegetables and high value commodities, and moving more into that entrepreneurship way of seeing things, which women have in there, and I have seen in many of the projects, because I think that we really need to stop saying, well, we're going to help women, but they need to stay in this informal sector. They need to stay in these low value activities because they generate all these benefits that are really making a case in terms of growing, in terms of helping the economies to grow, in terms of increasing incomes, in terms of better nutritional outcomes.
I think it's so critical to think about what you've been saying about the orientation of the design, the innovations, even the language we use, because I think some of that is further exacerbating the challenge. And I think it's really important, and I'm picking up from this conversation just how intentional we have to be to really embrace the opportunity that exists and the investment that needs to be made and really move that forward. And I think that's really key. So just recently, the annual State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World report was just launched by 5 UN agencies in Rome. What struck you most about this report's findings?
So let me start by saying that I was so glad and excited to hear that the focus of the SOFI report was going to be on healthy diets and who can or cannot afford a healthy diet. And the reason that I'm excited about that is because I think that it's opening the opportunity to have conversations in relation to that topic. And we need to have those conversations. So I was very excited to see that. But perhaps 3 things that I believe that were very important for me as I was reading the report. The first one is positive, and we need positive news nowadays. It is very important. But one of the positive news of the report is that if you think about Africa as a whole, this long upward trend in hunger is slowing. Perhaps not as much as one could wish, and not enough to meet SDG 2. But it is slowing, and this is positive. This is positive, and a lot of things have happened that are included in that report, including COVID, Ukraine. So to see that this upward trend is slowing, it's good news. But now comes the bad news, because what we are seeing, and again, in terms of Africa, is that Africa overtook Asia for the first time as the region with the highest number of people living with hunger. And that's over 300 million people, and that's a lot of people living with hunger. And then the third key message from the report, which I think that is very important and spoke about the central topic of the report, is that the report found that 2.7 billion people, which is a third of the world's population, and actually in Africa is 2/3 of the population, cannot afford a healthy diet. So it is a very important message in terms of a call to action and to really understand what is behind here. What I think that we need to digest is what is happening with diets around the world. And we are very worried because what we are seeing is that diets are relying too much on starchy staple foods like maize, like rice, like bread, which are filling stomachs and are relatively affordable. But we are missing some other types of foods. And the reason that we are missing on those is because they have become very expensive. So a little bit the message is calories are cheap, nutrition is expensive. And again, this gives us really relevant information to start prioritizing where to act to address this issue of increasing the consumption of a healthy diet. And it's thinking about what are those things that can change when you think after production, when you think off farm, what are the innovations that can help us to reduce the price of fruits and vegetables and animal source food so that people can consume more of them.
And I mean, I think as you've talked about, some of those interventions are hard and some of them are soft around like the infrastructure needed, but also the policy or the environment there. As the planet's continuing to warm, how should we be thinking about this in a different way as well, in safeguarding, because that's an additional pressure which is impacting the affordability of healthy diets in so many different ways. So how should we be bringing in that dimension to that conversation around healthy diets? And why does it, I guess, accelerate the urgency for action?
So one, I think that you need to think holistically about the entire food system. So yes, it is true that we have been successful in terms of reducing the price of wheat, maize, and that's basically because we have put tons of money into research for increasing yields, for coming up with new varieties that respond to pests and diseases. So this is a result of a decision that we have made, and governments have prioritized this, research institutes have prioritized this. So why don't we think in a similar way when we think about fruits and vegetables, when we think about animal source food? So it's a matter of, I think that it's also a matter of reallocating resources. If we are serious about addressing this issue of increasing the amount of people that can consume a healthy diet, well, we need to drive resources towards making that happen. And there are interesting innovations. I think that we need to double down on those innovations. And for instance, things that we are doing is innovating using insects to produce feed. And we have seen that the price is going down in terms of this feed. And that has repercussions in terms of the price of dairy, for instance, or eggs. Just to share with you, Paul, some of the things that are really excited about that we have in the pipeline in terms of innovations. So we really believe that improving in terms of cold chain can make a big difference in terms of reducing the price of fruits and vegetables because that reduces food loss. So we are experimenting in terms of rethinking refrigeration so that it is more efficient and it's half the price. And I'm super optimistic about that. And I believe that if we can reduce the price of that, if we can make cold chain work in these countries in Africa, there's going to be drastic reductions in relation to food loss for fruits and vegetables. And that will have enormous implications in terms of prices. The other kind of innovation that I'm super excited. It's, for instance, we are experimenting with ozone and how to use ozone in a safe way as a way to kill pathogens in food and to extend the shelf life of foods such as fruits and vegetables. And again, we believe that this can have big changes in terms of these prices for fruits and vegetables. And then the other one that I think sometimes people forget, and again, this is why I think that the Sophie report, but by putting in the center this topic of a healthy diet, it's opening the conversation for this. So the other thing that I'm working on is on food safety, because that's also part of being able to access a healthy diet. So like good food, what is good food? If you think about the burden of foodborne disease, so, if you use this measurement, DALY's disability adjusted life years, to understand the burden of foodborne disease, it is comparable to the top 3 infectious diseases. So you have tuberculosis in terms of burden, then foodborne disease, then you have malaria and HIV. It's really something that we need to address. And many of these innovations in relation to ozone that I was talking about are really trying to address this issue of foodborne disease, thinking, for instance, about milk. So yeah, I think that as a community, we need to double down on those, based on evidence, based on everything that we have talked today, Paul, based on where women are, based on off-farm activities. We need to put all that together and double down on innovations that can address, that specific pieces and that can make a real difference in terms of increasing the consumption of a healthy diet.
Talking to you, I'm understanding the systems connection and the layers that we need to be thinking about. And your experience is amazing for helping to stretch people's imagination, but also look for those solutions and think in that holistic way. And it's so great to hear about the work that's going on and the excitement about the opportunity that you see, because these numbers are big, but there is bright spots and there are ways of us moving forward. So I really thank you for explaining some of the intricacies of the system to me. One thing I like to always close off conversations with is a bit of a question we can all relate to. What's a food memory that shaped? You've talked to me a little bit about your family and how that inspired you. What's a food memory that shaped you, who you are today? And I coming from Colombia, I'm sure there's some amazing food experiences. But what's something that's really shaped who you are today?
I mean, this is perhaps not such a memory, but it happened recently. So I have 2 kids, 10 and 12, 2 boys, and they used to fight all the time. They love each other, but they fight a lot. When I was pregnant, I used to eat a lot of spinach. And I don't know if it was just Popeye. I don't know, Paul, if you grew up with Popeye's cartoon. Did you watch that? I don't know. But I used to watch a lot when I was growing up.
Yeah, of course, with spinach. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which is super interesting because it's this guy that eats his spinach and becomes really strong and does all these wonderful things. But inspiring Popeye. And there's a lot of studies that say that if you consume spinach while you are pregnant, then that's going to have enormous benefits in terms of the development of the brain of the kid. So when I was pregnant with Giancarlo, my oldest son, I used to eat a lot, every single day, And then with Alessio, the second one, which, I ate a lot of spinach, but, things are different. And the funny story is that some months ago, I heard that Giancarlo, the oldest one, was trying to make fun of the other. And he was saying, I'm smarter than you because when my mom was pregnant and I was there, she ate more spinach than she did when you were in the stomach. So yeah, and as you can see, we have a lot of conversations in relation to nutrition in my family. It's part of the way that we live. It's part of the way that we see life. Very conscious about that. So it's in a lot of conversations that the 4 of us have.
It's so important to helping kids understand that connection between food we eat and the nutrition. And it sounds like you've done that very successfully with your boys. That's amazing. Ana Maria, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. And thank you again for the work that you're doing. And I just encourage you to, in this work, because it's incredibly important to continue to help make the connections that we need to make, because unfortunately we're sometimes missing these connections, and they're huge investment opportunities. They're huge opportunities to really increase our impact and drive change. And so it's so important. So thank you again for chatting to me today.
Thank you, Paul, for inviting me. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks a lot.